we've helped identify some of these neurotoxins in Maine that are showing up at sites in California in the Siskiyou National Forest. These are Chinese-made poisons that have no registered use in North America, which means that they don't test for them at cannabis labs. And the only way they identified what those poisons were in California was by bringing in the Weapons of Mass Destruction unit from the National Guard. So these are neurotoxins. If you strapped all of these chemicals onto a bomb or something, you would understand it as a chemical nerve agent and a biological weapon or a chemical weapon. But there's I guess you can stretch logic to understand that there's an agricultural application for them. Because if you dump like 12 or 15 of these different poisons into a barrel or a soda can and put a wick in it and let it smolder, the smoke fills the hoop house and coats all of the marijuana, everything in there, with fungicide and pesticide.
Steve Robinson, it's good to talk to you, my brother. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, hanging in there. Still above ground, so that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I know. All of us, I think, are just kind of like 1 foot in the grave at this point. I feel like we're all slowly drowning, right?
I guess.
So what a positive way to start the conversation. So I saw your conversation with Tucker Carlson, as did millions of other people. And what struck me right away is that you are telling a story I know very, very well. And I couldn't believe when I was listening to you the parallels between the story of my story growing up in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, and what's currently happening in Maine. And it seems like you guys are beginning to experience something that we experienced in Vancouver 30 years ago. So, Steve, I want to start by asking, what is happening in Maine?
Well, I think there's a number of things happening in Maine: economic decline, globalization, immigration, both domestic and foreign. And in 2020, we legalized marijuana, and we added a new dynamic to the mix, which was creating a legal environment that was ripe for the playbook that was run by Chinese criminal groups in Western Canada and the Western United States first. They would come and run that playbook in Maine. And essentially what they do is come here first with kind of these wildcat criminal groups and individuals who kind of test the waters and explore the legal system and the society and the culture and see what the guardrails will be for operating a profitable criminal organization. And then as they slowly figure out the rules of the road, so to speak, they maximally exploit it with state-backed entities and even more sophisticated criminal entities. So we saw beginning in 2020 a rapid accumulation of property by Chinese individuals, predominantly from New York and Massachusetts. Most of these were cash buyers. I would say about 2/3 of the properties were cash buyers, and the other third were mortgages, primarily through one mortgage company in New York State, which we can talk about that particular mortgage company a little bit because it's highly unusual to have such a concentration of this specific activity through one bank. But the properties were diverse. I mean, very rural, poor, lots of barns, outbuildings, garages, some commercial buildings. But it was everything from double wides to massive farm complexes. They liked them on the I-95 corridor. And from 2020 to 2024, when we started really looking and trying to identify these properties, they acquired, by our estimate, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 properties in the state of Maine. These properties would be gutted and, retrofitted to become very efficient marijuana grows. Some of these houses that have been raided or that we've had the opportunity to inspect the interior of, they're growing in every single room. One of these farmhouses had 12 separate grow rooms, and then the living quarters of the house had seedlings and other drying and processing areas. So they're using every single space that they can find that's under a roof in Maine and they can buy to grow, process, and traffic marijuana. Initially, they would do it through the legal medicinal program, but when they bumped up against the plant count limits, they lost their licenses and just proceeded to do it totally illegally. And that worked for them for a long time until the Department of Homeland Security had a memo that leaked that said that disclosed the existence of all of these growing facilities in the state of Maine. And then we at the Maine Wire went out and decided to find them, photograph them, track down the owners, try to talk with the operators and the occupants of these houses, and try to learn as much as we possibly could about how these networks were operating in the state. And now they're kind of swinging back to the medicinal program, back to legalization. But the law enforcement has now started to take interest in this. There was an indictment last week, 2 weeks ago rather, in the District of Massachusetts that had ties to Maine. There were 7 individuals, all Chinese nationals, who were indicted. 6 were arrested, 1 still on the lam, but they used a complex money laundering and human trafficking operation to grow marijuana illegally. So this was a cross-state, international, really, criminal organization that was bringing indentured servants from China across the Mexican border into the United States, flying them up to New England, stealing their passports and putting their passports in a safe and saying, you're going to work off your smuggling debt at a cannabis house until we say so. So there's human trafficking, money laundering, cannabis trafficking, and it's incredibly profitable for these networks. A lot of the profits get tucked back into real estate as they grow and expand and buy new houses. But a lot of the money gets laundered and used for other purposes. We don't really know exactly what the money's being used, except for, they sometimes have nice Porsches and $75,000 Rolexes.
It's very, very similar to my experience. So I have to ask, so marijuana is legal in the state of Maine. Of course, there are other states in the U.S. where marijuana is not legal. So the marijuana that's being grown in Maine, is that mostly being exported to the states where marijuana is still illegal?
Yeah, so there was an assistant attorney general who testified on a bill kind of related to this situation, and he said that they estimated about 2/3 of the illegally grown cannabis is leaving the state. I think it's probably higher than that, just because the volume of production on both the legal and illegal side is so high that it's depressed the price significantly. We're down, price per gram in Maine is down more than 50% from where the market initially stabilized. And as a result, if you're a criminal organization, you're just a business that doesn't follow the law. You're still making the same decisions about maximizing profits. So if you have the decision between selling for $7 a gram in Maine or putting all of your product into the back of a U-Haul and driving it out to Ohio and selling it for $20 or $25 a gram, well, that's a no-brainer. So I think that it's probably more than 2/3 of the illegally grown product is leaving the state. And I think that they're finding markets both in states where cannabis is already legal, like in Massachusetts or New York for a period of time, essentially inverting illegally grown product into the legal market. I know this was happening in the state of Maine. Some of the illegally grown cannabis was just being, siphoned into the medicinal program through a few medicinal caregivers. But I think it's also moving through the hemp loophole into these other states. And if you just look at the sheer volume of cannabis that's being produced, whether it's legal or illegal, like in California with the Glass House raid, they're producing, all of the legal growers in California are producing something like 35 or 40 times more than the cannabis that then could possibly be consumed by people living in California. So just, that some of that cannabis is leaving the state. The same goes for Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a tremendous Chinese organized crime problem, not that big of a population, and they're growing an insane amount of marijuana. Like, very obviously that marijuana is trafficked out into other states. So where is it being sold? The most logical place is for it to be sold at these tobacco shops and head shops and hemp shops as THCA or THCP or THCQ. And everyone that's benefiting from the scheme is just pretending like it's not cannabis. It's cannabis. It's just regular old weed, but we're just going to pretend that it's hemp because everybody involved is making a lot of money.
Right. And so, okay, whenever organized crime in the United States is talked about nowadays, generally it's Mexican cartels that are referenced, or, say street gangs like Tren de Aragua is one that we've heard recently with the migrant crisis, right? But Chinese organized crime always seems to fly under the radar. I mean, even in Canada, our society is still in a state of denial where nobody believes any of this stuff is happening. So why is Chinese organized crime often so overlooked?
Well, I think part of that is because of things like the cannabis markets in Maine. The reason why they chose it, it's a very low risk activity. They were able to make hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars just in Maine without ever having any trouble with the police whatsoever. Because once Maine legalized cannabis, it deprioritized it for law enforcement. So they weren't interested in making marijuana arrests anymore. If neighbors called and say, hey, there's some strange activity at this barn next door and it smells like, a skunk gangbang, and the cops are like, yeah, well, marijuana is legal in the state now. Don't worry about it. But in addition to that, law enforcement was almost like embarrassed to do a marijuana arrest. So even if they busted a truck that had like 100 pounds of marijuana in it, it wasn't like something they're out looking for. So in those instances, though, when you have an arrest like that, they get brought to jail, $500 bail, they're out. Maybe they skip their court date. Who really cares? Not that big of an issue for them. So there's no penalty whatsoever for totally flouting the laws. Whereas if you look at Maine's fentanyl situation, where there is a much different attitude from law enforcement because of the high rate of overdose, the growing rates of addiction, the property crime, and other crime that spiral outward from addiction. The fentanyl rackets in Maine are primarily run by Dominican transnational criminal organizations, and that's a very high risk activity because if one of those individuals is caught with, I guess a level of product that would amount to trafficking, then they're going away to jail for a very long time. And that's, there's going to be more of an investigative effort to flip that individual and try to track where that product came from. There's going to be FBI, DEA, all the federal partners you could ask for. Whereas with pot, none of that. You can fly completely under the radar by existing in this gray area between something law enforcement takes really seriously and something that people just kind of, they like it. They don't care. Marijuana, what's the big deal? So I think you could apply that same attitude that the Chinese criminal organizations have to some of their other activities, where they're skirting in between the legal and the illegal, but staying under the radar. They're a little bit smarter. And I'd also say they take a different approach to violence too. Like the Central American cartels, they don't mind occasionally getting their hands dirty, whereas the Chinese organized crime prefer the assassin's mace. They're going to allow someone else to do the dirty work for them, or if they can maneuver you into a situation where their goals are accomplished, they're happier to do that than to have their direct fingerprints on it. So I think they're just smarter. Really, it's part of their strategy and tactics to skate below the radar.
Yes. And from my experience here, my discussions with Sam and just seeing it, just growing up in the middle of it in a town that was completely taken over by CCP affiliated organized crime groups. What they do is they don't operate like a street gang or say like even the Mafia would. They operate in a sense where they get members of the United Front Work Department associations nominated to the municipal government, school boards. I mean,
yes.
All the way down to like your local Walmart buyers club. They infiltrate everything so that they can influence the surrounding society that way. They're much smarter in that they understand that having political influence and it is far more valuable than taking over a couple of blocks in a neighborhood, right?
Well, they also know that it buys them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, goodwill in a community. For example, there's 4 real estate agents in Maine who have done the vast majority of buying for properties that would later become marijuana grows owned by Chinese individuals from out of state. Those 4 real estate agents are all Chinese nationals who moved to Maine from another state. They could be U.S. citizens. They could be green card holders. I think most of them are U.S. citizens, but they're very well, incorporated into the community. They've adopted Americanized names, but we know at least one of them who's, on boards and is very well known in the community and, Very, very deep undercover, I would say. We've got her on security camera footage showing a house to some people and telling them in Mandarin where they can put their marijuana grow and how it's going to be set up. But then in an interview, she'll deny that she had any knowledge that the buyers were going to be engaged in illegal marijuana cultivation. And if you ask somebody about this particular real estate agent, they'll say, "Oh, her? No, couldn't possibly be. No, not at all, not her." So they have a way of very smartly developing covers. And, telling, if you talk with them about something, they'll tell you, 99% of the story and withhold maybe the most important 1%. So I think that they do that in a way that some of the Central American criminal organizations don't. Like, you never see Tren de Agua or the Trinitarios. Like, they're not running for city council yet, as far as I know. But you're not, you don't see the Dominican, friends of the DR associations the way you see the Chinese associations. So I think they do work together, but the Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party affiliated groups are just a little bit subtler.
Yeah, and they like to give off, like you said, the appearance of harmlessness of, I'm just a member of your community trying to participate in your democracy. I'm an American, like they do here. I'm a Canadian. I mean, we are in Canada at a point where we have known United Front members or affiliates or whatever who are actually members of our government. Right? Like people who are running for parliament. We have recently in our recent election, we had a conservative candidate who was a broadcaster in Hong Kong, a radio broadcaster whose life was threatened by the CCP in the lead up to the election. And he was actually told not to campaign because his life was in danger. And our RCMP, which is Canada's version of the FBI, we're like, it's just unreal. It's like, how are you completely neutered against this? How can you not do anything about this? But I think it's because these people are so embedded into every facet of society that there's really no fighting them. We're just encircled.
And you would also expect something like that to trigger a whole of government response, like right up to your prime minister. I mean, I'm not an expert in, Canadian politics, but if it were me, I would think that if we have candidates who are being told that there's a threat to your life and we can't protect you from another nation, therefore you can't run for office, like that seems like a problem that goes right to the top of government and is like, okay, well, no more visas for Chinese individuals, like. And we're, expelling every single Chinese citizen right now on an emergency basis until this gets taken care of. And if it ever happens again, there will be like serious sanctions against the Chinese Communist Party. But the fact that doesn't happen suggests, as you said, a level of beholdenness to the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, it's also too, in your conversation with Tucker, you alluded to people in Maine not wanting to appear to be racist, and that's why they never really confront this thing head on. And we'll expand the conversation in a minute to other forms of other immigrants and people who are operating in Maine. But that's always been the problem in Canada. Is Canada wants to portray itself as being this compassionate, diverse, equitable, and inclusive country, and so confronting a problem the size of what we have with China here in Canada. I mean, we are at a point in Canada where we couldn't purge China from our country if we tried, because our economy is so dependent on them. Chinese money laundering just in Vancouver and Toronto alone is really the only thing that's keeping those economies running. So if we were to expel them, we would be looking at a potential economic catastrophe. And that's a lot of the reason why I was excited about talking to you today, because I'm really hoping that through your conversation with Tucker Carlson and just the work that you're doing with Mainwire, again, you're not the China guy or the weed guy. You're an investigative journalist covering a lot of things. But on this subject, I really hope that Americans are paying attention, because this is one that Canadians slept on, ignored, and turned a blind eye to for 30 years. Now we are in a position where China is embedded in all of our political structures, all of our institutions, and all of our industries. There's nothing we can do. We're stuck. And what you're experiencing in Maine seems to be the runoff from us, and now the seed has been planted and is growing through the United States. So my next question I wanted to ask is, with the money that's being laundered from these illegal cannabis operations into real estate, are they buying more farmland and barns and rundown farmhouses, or are they laundering that money into, single family homes, townhouses, things like that?
So we don't see a lot of farmland purchased in Maine. If you look at the U.S. Agricultural Department's report on Chinese-owned farmland, there are, something like 90 acres in Maine that are owned by people they believed are linked to China. But I've always taken issue with that because, how exactly do you determine what land should fall into that category? Like if there's an LLC that's registered to a holding company that is, ultimately owned by a Chinese national, is probably not going to fall into that category, depending on how deeply whoever's doing the report looks. Whereas if there's an individual who is technically a U.S. citizen, but ultimately from China, well, they could still be operating at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party, but they're a U.S. citizen. So are you going to categorize land that they own as Chinese-owned land? So I don't know exactly what the methodology is there. And I know, at least looking at the land that they describe in Maine, is flawed in that it both kind of overstates in a weird way, but also understates the magnitude of the property controlled by Chinese individuals, Chinese affiliated individuals. So the properties that we see them buying are mostly residential homes. I mean, I would say, 85% of it is residential homes. And it's whatever's cheap, whatever is close to I-95. I mean, they're very practical in terms of, wanting big rooms. I mean, we've heard stories of, Chinese guys who don't speak a lot of English going into gas stations and liquor stores, just saying, communicating that they're looking for a house with big rooms. It's pretty simple. They want houses with big rooms because that's the most efficient, the most effective for growing pot. The other thing that we see them buying up is spaces that can be converted into boarding houses or flop houses. These are spaces where they're not going to be growing marijuana, but it's where their workers, whether voluntary or involuntary, will be living, sleeping, eating, that kind of thing. We've seen some doctors' offices in Western Maine where the individuals are, Chinese guys from New York. They come in and they ask, can this be turned into a boarding house? And basically, they're trying to find a space where somebody who's involved in the network can show up, have a room to themselves, sleep, and wake up in the middle of the night and go tend the marijuana sites out around the periphery of that boarding house location. They're not all of the houses that they own and control and that are part of this network are fully occupied all the time. In fact, I would say, most of them aren't. They really only need to tend to the marijuana plants once every day or two. So they have places where they do occupy and they minimize their risk because, most of the time when law enforcement raids one of these, nobody's there. And it's either because they know not to be there from 9 to 5 when law enforcement are conducting raids, or they're at a nearby facility. But I would say even when we were investigating these places before the raids really started, we'd go to a place and we'd knock on the door and we'd, try to figure out what was going on, see if anyone was there, talk with neighbors. And it was like 10 minutes later, a black Toyota truck would come zipping down into the driveway and pull in. So they'd obviously seen us on their security cameras and they were stationed somewhere nearby and came to check on their property and see what was going on. But, that's kind of how they were operating. But it's that 85%, I would say, residential properties. And then there are a few commercial properties. And later into the development of the Chinese drug cartel in Maine, what we saw is just an increasing level of sophistication from these guys. Like as they learned, at first they were burning houses down because they didn't understand how much electricity they were using and what was required in terms of a commercial grade entrance. And then they got that figured out. And they become more and more sophisticated, both in terms of the properties they want to buy and the properties that they're building for themselves. So we've seen lots of large metal buildings go up along the I-95 corridor. They're building spaces that are like custom to what their needs are. And those are very, very sophisticated facilities. I mean, we found one that was this one was rated and it was 3 stories tall, a building that they put up on the property. And they had a machine there called the Triminator, which is like a $15,000 automatic marijuana flower processor. And it can do something like 20 or 25 pounds in an hour. Is the rate of processing, which if you look at Maine's cannabis law, say they're, let's just imagine that they're a licensed medicinal grower, they're allowed to have 35 mature plants or 500 square feet of canopy at any given moment. So way more than would ever be necessary for a $15,000 Triminator. You don't need the Triminator if you're doing things legally. But these guys were clearly planning to process a significant amount of marijuana on a regular basis. So as their sophistication has increased, the nature of property that they're looking to buy has also changed. And now they're even just building their own properties. But I would say just one last thing, in addition to the marijuana facilities that they own, control around the state of Maine, Nine Dragons Paper owns our three paper mills. I mean, these used to be some of the most significant employers in the state of Maine and still are. I mean, in Rumford, Maine, it's the mill there is still the largest employer. It's like 400 people in that town. And there's a mill in Old Town, and then there's one out in Baileyville in Washington County. And the one in Baileyville is interesting because it controls also the Deepwater Port in Eastport. So the only thing coming in and out of the Deepwater Port in Eastport is Chinese-controlled pulp and paper.
And so who are Nine Dragons? And
it's the largest paper company in the world, started by a Chinese billionaire in I guess in California I believe in the 70s. But, the story is, I guess, a self-made Chinese billionaire, China's richest woman, and she starts Nine Dragons Paper, and at some point in time just buys all the mills in Maine, and still owned by them, and not really much known from there, other than they're kind of limping along. They're not really the picture of health, but those mills and their property are never included in the U.S. Agricultural Department's analysis of land owned by the Chinese. Neither are the restaurants that all of these marijuana cartels own. Neither are the massage parlors that all these marijuana cartels own. So I think when you're trying to assess the total, property or assets controlled by CCP affiliated groups in any state, you have to be very clear about what your methodology is and what system you're using to assess that, because it can't just be nationality or citizenship of the person on the deed or the business title, whatever. It can't just be individuals. It has to also be groups, because they're savvy and they'll form LLCs and they'll use registered agents and they'll use different front groups to hide and obscure who owns what. So if anything, the report that the U.S. Agricultural Department puts out, and I don't know if the Canadian government does something similar, but that report really downplays the threat, because it seriously underestimates the full scope of control that CCP affiliated organizations have. So when I see conservatives in America reposting that chart, this is unbelievable. Can you believe this? This is outrageous. Why don't we do something about this? I'm like, this is way worse than you think. It's way worse than that.
It's way worse.
It's so much worse.
Yeah. So so just to make the connection here for our listeners, people who are regular listeners of the show, I'm sorry I've told this story before, and I'm going to summarize it here because there's so many questions I want to ask. I grew up in a town called Richmond, British Columbia. It's 20 minutes south of Vancouver, over the bridge. It's a tiny little island across the water. When I grew up there, it was a lower middle class town. I'm assuming very much like the one that you're from. A place where my mom was a single mom. You could take your kids. Rents were cheap, cost of living was cheap, and it was a safe place to be. Somewhere in around 1996, billions of Chinese dollars out of nowhere just floods into Richmond. My neighborhood, for example, full of duplexes, fourplexes, 95% of them sold, bulldozed to the ground. That summer, my neighborhood looked like Kosovo. If you had to taken a photo and sent it to National Geographic, it could have passed for a war zone. Just flattened houses everywhere. Within a year or two later, mansions spring up on the plots where those houses were. So what they were doing was, rather than buying one or two houses, they were buying our entire neighborhood, because they knew that if they built you build $1 million home surrounded by a bunch of $300,000 homes, your home is not worth $1 million. However, if you build $30 million homes and you completely give the entire area a facelift, you drive up the cost of all the housing in that area, which is exactly what they did. Most of us got priced out of our neighborhood. Soon after, you have pool halls and corner stores and all of these weird laundromats, these weird little businesses pop up where it just seems like nobody works there, or they're not what, like you could go to the pool hall and play pool, but nobody's there. It's completely empty, right? And over time, the Maseratis arrive, the Ferraris arrive, the Lamborghinis arrive. More and more, this kind of spreads out. More and more neighborhoods are bulldozed to the ground. More and more mansions go up. There's money flying around everywhere. But again, our town is like a ghost town. Like there's businesses and things going on there. But if you go into any of the Chinese-owned businesses, there's nothing really happening. And most of us don't go into them because the signage is in Mandarin. Not to mention, a lot of these mansions in my neighborhood house like 10 to 12 to 13 pregnant Chinese women. So what these came to be known as were birthing homes. Yep. And there were a lot of people in my neighborhood who took notice, who were screaming about it, but their voices were suppressed by people in city council, provincial governments who were accusing them of racism. Anytime this issue was brought up, the racism accusations began to fly, and it successfully quietened like 99% of the people. And it got to a point where the pressure was so great that there were a few women, moms from my neighborhood, who were screaming about this, who actually got profiled in not local newspaper, our provincial newspaper, as racists, as bigots. That's how bad this got. And we're watching our entire town change. It's becoming Richmond now, you could walk through it at night and it's black. Most of the homes are empty. Most of the condo buildings are empty. Nobody lives there. It's all just money laundering, and everybody knows it. But it's like this dark secret that people don't talk about because they're afraid of being accused of being. Now, I got to say, recently that's changed with people like Sam Cooper, who have been all over this for a while. The attitude is starting to shift where people are starting to actually confront it, but we're 30 years too late. It's too far gone, man. And I left Vancouver years ago for the reason that I can't afford to live there. Now we are at a point where the average detached home is $1.4 million. That's a starter home. That's not a family home. The money laundering is crazy. It's all over the place. And all of the CCP, the global CCP money laundering networks are ran out of Richmond. All of the highest United Front Work Department members, CCP agents are located in Richmond now. And that's what happened to us. And I'm just grazing the surface. I mean, I could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, I mean, the parallels are so eerie. Just to give you one, before COVID happened and the lockdowns happened, there were Chinese investors making moves to start a medical tourism industry in and around Lewiston, Auburn. And they were buying up similar buildings to what you described, very large houses with 10, 15 rooms or medical facilities. And this is what it was going to be, was birthing houses. And the native leaders in Lewiston, Auburn were kind of celebrating this and hailing this as a good development for the area, that we were going to have all these wealthy Chinese people coming over here to get, lung surgeries or diabetes medication. I don't know what they thought was going to happen, but it's very clear that these were birthing houses. And COVID happened, and so that came to a screeching halt. But those very same individuals just kind of flipped the playbook and went into cannabis houses. And like you said, with the businesses that look like, there's no way this should still be staying afloat. Well, there's only one way a business stays a business without actually making money. And that's because, it is making money on paper. So we've seen a number of these individuals with deep ties to Chinese marijuana grows also operating these restaurants that don't really have a lot of foot traffic, or massage parlors that are in dingy basements. And, sometimes they get raided by the police for sex trafficking and aggravated sex trafficking. We don't have the pool hall effect as much. But sometimes, I think that the legitimate marijuana license is enough to be laundering money through. And the other thing is, one of the things that we've, realized through our investigation, and this is reflected in the indictment that surfaced in Massachusetts 2 weeks ago, is that there's a tactic they can use with a lawyer who is a willing co-conspirator to avoid paying taxes and to clean their money. And so if I've got, $250,000 cash that I, can't say where it came from. Maybe my cousin in the family gave it to me, or it's the product of illegal marijuana sales, but I want to buy a house with that, or I want to use it somehow. I can't go to the real estate agent and give him the bag of $250,000 cash and then take the house. He's not going to accept that. And I can't bring that bag of cash to the bank and drop it on the counter for a deposit, because they're going to tell the IRS, suspicious transaction report's going to be filed. All kinds of problems come from that. But if I've got an attorney with flexible morals, who's, interested in maybe taking a little extra off the top in order to help me out, take that bag of cash and he puts it in his trust account. And then I tell him to create a bank check drawing on that trust account for $250,000 so that I can go give that to the realtor and buy the house. Well, now the realtor's happy. The bank doesn't know. The IRS doesn't know. I'm happy. My lawyer's taking a little skim off the top, so he's happy. And our communications are protected by lawyer-client privilege. So as long as no one gets arrested and there's no, criminal prosecution, everything's going to make out fine. So that's one tactic that they can use to, quote unquote, season the money that wouldn't involve any kind of front business whatsoever. And we've talked with sources throughout the state who have had limited interactions with some of the Chinese growers, and they've all kind of said some variation of the same thing, which is that one of the reasons why they're buying real estate close to airports, or they're making various decisions about how they buy real estate, is because if you acquire too much money in China as a Chinese national, eventually the CCP is going to come for you. But if you are tucking your money away into real estate, it puts it beyond the reach of the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party to a certain extent. At least that's what these people say when they're over here trying to, build their cover story. But it does make sense, and that would track with what you've seen from, wealthy people the world over like to hide their money in real estate. There's all kinds of condos in London and New York and Vancouver and Toronto that are sitting empty because like some Saudi oil sheik just wants to have property investments to protect from inflation or something. It's kind of the same way, except for it's a censorship-resistant savings route. And now what we're seeing in Maine is they're starting to bring these houses to market. They're starting to sell these houses because I think that they probably sense, to a certain extent, that the gig is up, that people are aware of what's going on, and the risk calculus has changed a little bit when it comes to operating like this in Maine. So now they're maybe looking to sell some of their wealth, that's in real estate, and move it to other states like Ohio or Montana, other jurisdictions where they think they'll be able to run the same playbook effectively. But the trouble is they're selling these homes to unsuspecting buyers without disclosing, there might be some crazy pesticides or fungicides or black mold here. This was formerly owned by a criminal organization that just like grew a bunch of drugs here. They're not disclosing that to the buyers. So I think that's going to be an issue that they're going to have to deal with on the political side, is what are the rules we should be imposing on our real estate agents when it comes to Chinese criminal groups trying to offload their crime properties on unsuspecting families. But the parallels between what you just described in Richmond and what we started to see here in Maine are uncanny.
It's the same cover story as well. That's the cover story we were given, that they have to move their money out of China because they're living in a communist country and these are business people. But I'm sorry, man. I don't know, like billions and billions of dollars flowing in from, thousands, if not tens of thousands of individuals. I don't know. It just doesn't match up for me, especially when you consider that just moving the money offshore through China, you have to move through underground banks that are controlled by the CCP anyways. So, they obviously know that money is moving. And what I would say in terms of those houses being sold, I would keep a close eye on that, because that happened in Richmond. I mean, it still does happen in Vancouver all the time. But what they do is they flip the house. Once they artificially inflate and increase the value of the neighborhood, they flip that one house and then buy three more. And a lot of it is mortgage fraud in Toronto. So the system of money laundering that the CCP classically used in BC is now known internationally as the Vancouver model. But there's a new model of mortgage fraud that they're using in Toronto that's now referred to as the Toronto model. And it's one where they commit multiple layers of mortgage fraud to just keep buying houses over and just keep buying and keep buying and keep buying. Now, I want to move to the next part of this discussion. There's so much, and I really appreciate your time here today, because I already know a lot about this, but I'm I'm not going to lie, man. I was sitting in my car listening to your conversation with Tucker Carlson, and I felt like I was listening to myself. That's how fucking crazy this is. Like, I'm listening to you talk and I'm like, that's exactly what happened here. That's exactly the same thing I experienced. And it's wild because for people who may not be very geographically aware, Maine is in another country on the complete other side.
Yeah, we're like 4,000 miles away.
Right. So the coincidences here are not just mere coincidence. And so what happened in BC? So we had a key figure, and our key figure was our premier, which is Canada's version of a governor, named Christy Clark. And a lot of what happened in Vancouver and just BC in general happened under her watch. Now, there's never been any definitive proof that she was receiving bribes or that but you know, you can put two and two together.
Yeah,
you can
this is starting to sound familiar too.
So that takes me to my next question. Who is Janet Mills, and what is her part in all of this, in your view and perspective?
Yeah, so Janet Mills is the governor of Maine. She's on her second term right now. She's termed out. She was speculated as someone who would run for Senate against Susan Collins, who I think most of your viewers will know. I don't think she's actually going to run. I think she's done with her political career. But Janet Mills comes from a very political family. Her father was a judge, a state judge in Maine, and a U.S. attorney. And then one of her brothers was a state representative and a candidate for governor. One of her sisters is a hospital executive. Another of her brothers is a lawyer in the Farmington area. So it's kind of a well-known, very political family. She was a state rep. She served as the attorney general under our previous Republican governor, Paul LePage. And she won a fairly competitive primary to become the Democratic candidate when LePage left office. And, this entire criminal problem cropped up entirely on her watch. She comes into office in January of 2019. The property buying by Chinese nationals starts in 2019. Marijuana legalization happens in 2019. 2020 is when the law officially is rolled out, and businesses can begin legally cultivating, manufacturing, and selling the product. And as we also, we've reported on this before, but Ping Huang, the head of the Chinese consulate in New York, attended her inauguration. Kind of weird. Maine, just a state of 1.3 million people. Yeah, we've got the Nine Dragons paper mills and we export some lobster to these guys, but not exactly a significant geopolitical player to attract really the number 2 or number 3 guy for the CCP in the United States. It's interesting.
Interesting how it works.
Yeah, and he met with the Senate Majority Leader and the Secretary of State. It was an interesting meeting. I'm sure they talked about trade. But so that happens, and then we see the proliferation of Chinese organized crime throughout the state of Maine. Both massage parlors, yes, and different money laundering fronts. But really, the main thing we see is hundreds and hundreds of houses taken off of the residential market. And like in Richmond, this works to raise the price of all these comps because these guys are coming in and saying, I can sell it in 25 days, cash, 20% over asking. So prices just start exploding. And I know because during this period of time, I was trying to buy a house in Maine and was priced out of the market. And you can just see talking with real estate agents, they're like, geez, I wonder if this had anything to do with why prices went up so much. I was like, you think? Yeah, 1,000 people showing up to buy 1,000 houses cash for 20% over the asking price. Yes, that is going to have an increase on the cost of housing here. Even just your comps for house pricing are going to go up, and people, the listing prices, everything is going up. Yes, it was a totally pernicious force that priced out middle class Maine families and continues to do so. But then, so we've been trying to ask the governor about her take on this. It seems pretty logical. There's this huge criminal organization. Everybody in Maine is scared. It's ruining the quality of life for people. Marijuana is one of our biggest industries now, and they're all going out of business because the price is low as a result of this criminal organization. So it seems like a fairly humdrum activity for a political reporter to ask the governor, what do you think about this? not a, are you involved with this, but it's just like, hey, what are you going to do about this? Seems like a problem. She has yet to utter a single word about the Chinese cartels in Maine. Not one word. We got her in public at some defense contractor event and asked her the question, and she said, that's not what we're here to talk about. Done. That's the most we've ever been able to get out of her. Maura Healey, the governor of Massachusetts, has said more about this problem than Governor Mills has. And then we, at one point, are looking through real estate records, like combing through the physical real estate taxes and the mortgage documents, trying to put together the puzzle and build kind of like a database that will allow us to see the full scope of the problem. And we find that Paul Mills, her brother, who's a real estate attorney in Farmington, where she grew up, served as a real estate title transfer attorney for a Chinese national living in China. And this property was an illegal marijuana grow, according to the code enforcement officer, who told me on the record it was an illegal marijuana grow, and that he refused to authorize commercial grade power for it because it was an illegal marijuana grow. And the timing of the sale is also, or the timing of the transfer is also extremely suspicious, because if you look at the timing and the area around where this property was located, there was a joint raid by sheriffs. 3 different sheriff's departments and some local PDs all came in and raided. It was something like 4 or 5 different properties, very, very nearby where this property was. And then just like 10 days later, this real estate transfer happens, almost as if they're trying to say, let's obscure the ownership of this a little bit. Like if we move this, the owner of this property is someone in China, well, that's out of the reach of any American law enforcement. Whatever happens at that property, you're never going to be able to find Xiling Wu in Guangdong province and have an interview with them. It's just not going to happen. So there's zero accountability for the person who ultimately owns and controls this property that was gifted to them by a woman who supposedly lives in Quincy, Massachusetts. And just to add another layer of like, what to this, I called Paul Mills, posing as a man from Quincy looking to do a gift transfer on a property in Corinna. He told me that he doesn't do that. It's too far away from his office. And he recommended another law firm to do this real estate transfer. I thought that was interesting, that when Xiling Wu from Quincy, Massachusetts calls, he's ready to go do that transfer. And I actually did a 10-minute interview with him, which is recorded, and we tweeted out the entire thing, where I asked him about that. I was like, why? I called you, Paul, just like 2 seconds ago, pretending to be someone else, and you would not do the land transfer, but you did it for this Chinese marijuana grow and this Chinese national. So why is that? And he's like, somebody asked me to do it. I was like, okay, who? And he was like, I don't remember. That's weird.
Right.
So there's like all these kind of weird things around it. And still the governor has never mentioned it. And it could just be the case that Paul is, was taken advantage of. Maybe they thought that if they somehow entangled the governor's brother in their schemes, that would give them a layer of protection. Or maybe it was that they needed to like pay tribute to the political family in order to get protection. Or maybe Paul's helping them season the money. I don't know. He won't answer about his broader involvement, and he declined a subsequent in-person interview with me for the documentary that we made. And the governor won't say a word about it. And the rest of the media in this state won't cover it either. That's the weirdest thing. Is that you've got all these newspapers, and like they're not even covering the sex trafficking cases. Like there was a massage parlor in Portland was busted. A guy from New York is arrested. He's a Chinese national, and we get the court documents, and he threatened a 60-year-old lady with a gun, and was charged with aggravated sex trafficking. So you've got like maybe she had a green card or something, but she's a migrant. She's an old lady, like giving out hand jobs basically at gunpoint in Portland, and the newspapers can't cover it. But it's like if there's some issue with like Medicaid benefits for migrants, they're going to have like a candlelight vigil, and that's front page news, blah blah blah. So they simultaneously position themselves as like the most sympathetic defenders of marginalized cultures. But when there's like violence or something within the marginalized cultures, there's no media attention there. And just one more example, last October, the Hancock County Police responded to a house where there was a report of a gas leak. They show up and there's 5 Chinese nationals there, and just like a scene of chaos. There's like apparently a gas leak, and there's some people there. No one speaks English. There's a guy dead on the porch. There's a guy dead in the bedroom. 2 people are sick and have to be hospitalized. And eventually what emerges is that they were all Chinese illegal aliens. This is a property, by the way, that had like 3 or 4 months earlier had been raided, and they confiscated like 2,000 illegal marijuana plants. But the 2 of the individuals who died were illegal aliens who had come to the United States from China to Mexico and then up into the United States, and had New York driver's licenses somehow. And they'd only been in the state for a month. And then the 2 others were uncooperative, but they spoke fluent Spanish and fluent Mandarin. And they knew that they were illegal aliens. They admitted that they entered the country illegally over the southern border. And the Homeland Security was like, we'll tell ICE about it, but it's up to them whether they deport them, and then just released them. And no one ever even came to claim the bodies, which is,
wow.
I've been thinking about this a lot because we covered it when it initially happened, and we just got some public records to reveal the full scope of what had happened. Because we thought that it was a hit. Like, there's no way these propane heaters, just like, I guess the police records say that like the exhaust elbow on the propane heater just like became disconnected somehow. It's very, very weird. Like, I think that this was an attempted hit on this Chinese like flop house. Those heaters don't just like magically come apart and poison the entire house. They have safety features and shut off valves. It's just it's a weird situation. But in reading through all of these documents, it's like, why does American law enforcement have to deal with this? Like, why are they, we've got firefighters, ambulances, sheriffs, police showing up, trying to figure out what the situation is. No one speaks English and everyone's lying to you. Like, why do we have to put up with that? And then the 2 bodies go to the medical examiner's office. They get full autopsies. No one ever comes to claim the bodies. So it's taxpayer funded cremation, which is like heartbreaking and tragic, that these people just die in anonymity and no one seems to care. And then you think about their families back home under the 1-child policy, like their line just ended. Like, that's like the whole family just like, getting snuffed out. Like, mom and dad probably aren't going to hear. They're probably not reading the main wire, if I had to guess. They're never going to hear from their kid again. They're never going to get a remittance payment. And like, that's the end of their line.
Man, this is so crazy because the neighborhood that I ended up living in with my wife and children, we had at least 3 or 4 different instances of gunshots, lots of police showing up. I run 5 miles 3 times a week. So 9 times out of 10, I'd be on a run during running by one of these houses. Bunch of Chinese guys handcuffed on the side of the road, ambulance there, presumably removing a dead body from the mansion that they live in. It's, $2-3 million mansion. And then nothing in media, no reports on it. And if you've ever watched Canadian legacy media, they could probably use a murder or 2 because it is the hardest fucking thing to watch.
Yeah, it's kind of boring.
Yeah, exactly. And so another parallel here for our listeners. 2015, Justin Trudeau runs for election for Prime Minister of Canada. He is photographed at fundraisers with various United Front Work Department members, known CCP agents. Okay. Justin Trudeau runs on a campaign of marijuana legalization. There is at least one known $1 million+ donation made to the Trudeau Foundation by a very prominent Chinese businessman in Canada, also member of the United Front Work Department. 2016, marijuana is legalized. Same thing happens here in Canada. You see, because although marijuana is legal in Canada, and just to reinforce Steve's story here, it is not legal other places. Therefore, it can be legally grown in Canada and exported to other places.
Exactly.
Now, what that has led to in Canada. Now, listen, for everybody listening, I am a cannabis user. I was a proponent of legal cannabis. I had no idea this was going to lead to where we are now. I had no clue. I was one of those naive hippie idiots who was like, yeah, man, I'm going to be able to buy weed at the store, not realizing that this is going to just erupt into, organized crime, chaos everywhere. Now, the question I want to ask you, we've talked a little bit about the human trafficking aspect. I have a number of parallels here in Canada where, like I said, in Richmond, which was a tiny little fishing town, I'm very, very much probably like the one you're from, where hotels were built. Like we had a huge Radisson hotel that was built in the center of in the center of our city, which ended up becoming home to a number of brothels, which also happened to be places where fundraisers for political candidates were held. Go figure.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Right. But the other thing that this led to was a fentanyl epidemic, the likes of which the world has never seen before. Vancouver, BC is a fucking disaster zone. I was just there recently. It's like The Walking Dead. It is hell on earth. Now, the question I want to ask you is, are these organized crime activities isolated to just cannabis, or is there indication that they are also involved in fentanyl, methamphetamine, and other drugs?
Well, the Department of Homeland Security report assessed that they were using the proceeds from the cannabis trafficking to support narcotics and human trafficking. I myself have not seen any evidence of that. Of course, you know, a fentanyl super lab, you know, if you were hiding it, for example, in a paper mill or some other place, it's harder for me to find. You know, the cannabis grows in residential homes. Like that's easier. You know, that's a pattern. And with a little bit of gumshoe sleuthing, you're able to figure out where those are. You know, they leave behind, you know, footprints. But the fentanyl super labs, not so much. So I haven't found any evidence of that. And from everything that I can glean from law enforcement reports and from sources that I've communicated with, the fentanyl rackets in New England are controlled by Dominican organizations out of the Middlesex Valley, thinking like Lawrence, Massachusetts, to the point where like Lawrence man was arrested is kind of, you know, just a shorthand for Dominican guy pretending to be from Puerto Rico is arrested. So the Dominican nationals will, you know, they're kind of like the street level dealer for whoever's supplying the fentanyl. And it seems like there's not a tremendous amount of overlap between the Chinese groups and the Dominican groups. And what little information we have about their interaction is that some of the Chinese cash houses in Maine may have gotten robbed by Dominican groups who just kind of caught wind of where, you know, there's 5 elderly Chinese people living at this house and they work at a restaurant during the day. And we know that, you know, they're keeping like $100,000 cash there. Well, they just go knock it off and they know it's like very little risk, very easy target. But in terms of, you know, cooperating together, there's not a lot of new information I can add that doesn't come out of California. I think that there's some sophisticated relationships in terms of money laundering between Chinese groups and Mexican cartels in that area. But the fentanyl rackets, you know, are a distinct criminal group as far as I can see. But I think that the problem, you know, really goes hand in hand because it's about like this is going to sound kind of like, you know, like a lib speak, but it's like the soul, it's like the soul of the state is being sucked dry. You know, there's economic desperation. You know, these are, you know, people who would 25 years ago, they'd graduate from high school. They didn't have to go to college. They'd go get a union job, sweeping a mill floor, and they'd be making enough money so that they could raise a family of 4 and still buy a lake house and have snowmobiles and 4-wheelers. Like that was a good life for somebody who never went to college. Now it's like you've got to be able to make enough money to get out of Maine if you want to do anything with your life. You got to make enough money and get the hell out, go get a job somewhere. You know, if you're lucky enough to go to college and get that credential and you can go get a job in DC or New York or something, you know, that's the lucky few. But for the most part, Maine's now become just like a black hole that's really hard for people to escape. And when there's no jobs in your town, you know, when the biggest economic sector is like government work and cannabis, you know, there's going to be, I guess the lack of economic opportunity makes you more likely to experiment with something like drugs. You know, and if it's, you know, whether it's like highly potent THC that you're going to, you know, just bake your brain with every single day of the week, or doing something like fentanyl. I mean, like economic prosperity, I think would decrease the rates of drug addiction and drug abuse in Maine, just like the lack of economic prosperity has increased the rates of addiction. So we've created a very easy market for the people who are selling fentanyl. And I think part of that is the result of the Chinese activities driving up the cost of housing, undermining local businesses, really making things more expensive for local families. But it's a complex problem. The Chinese criminal groups aren't responsible for everything that's wrong with Maine. There's some economic forces like, an economy built around selling paper to newspapers. Well, all of a sudden, no one reads newspapers anymore, so that dries up, and the newspapers can't shift fast enough. The paper mills can't shift fast enough to catch up with that change, and so they go out of business, and they're still out of business. So there's some like broader globalization forces that are causing trouble for the state of Maine. But generally speaking, it's we're kind of caught in a doom loop of bad public policies creating an economic downturn, leading to bad public policies, which further the economic downturn, which lead to more bad public policies, which only deepen the economic downturn. We're just caught in that spiral, and we can't get out of it, in large part because there's a big group of people who live in coastal Maine who aren't from Maine, and they don't work. They don't really suffer under the policies that the state is handing down. They're just like baby boomer retirees with their second home. Their tax nexus is in Florida. All their money is coming out of their Fidelity Trust account. So they really, they're not dealing with they're not sending their kids to school. They're really not driving on the roads in northern Maine. They don't have law enforcement issues. Their houses aren't getting broken into. They're not dealing with any of the problems that Mainers are dealing with, but they're voting, and, they're going to continue to vote for Democratic policies and give to Democratic politicians. And so, yeah, it's a complex problem here. You can blame a lot on the Chinese criminal organizations, but not all of Maine's suffering, and only in part can you blame the fentanyl epidemic on them.
It's wild because it's the same exact problem that we have I'm not there anymore, but in BC, like the same problem. And it's wild because it's like these people, these wealthy boomers, whatever you want to call them, these people the only people who can afford to live there, they're not dealing with the problems that people that the average person is dealing with. So they keep voting for the same policy. They're pouring communism on top of communism.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Right. And as a younger working person, you're looking around you like, please just put out the fucking fire. Like, why are we adding fuel to the fire? There's a litany of problems. And again, like you said, it's not just all Chinese organized crime. There's a bunch of other things. I mean, see, here in Canada, the main problem we're dealing with now is that Mexican cartels have arrived. And what's interesting in your story is another parallel here in Canada where farmhouses, farmland is being rented out to these. So in Canada, the Mexican cartels and the Chinese organized crime are now working in tandem. And what they're doing is they're building fentanyl super labs in these farmhouses and sheds and barns on these properties. And were it not for President Trump making this an issue, like a leading issue in legacy media, Canadians would have never known this was happening. Now a series of super labs have been busted, mostly in BC, as a result, because I think the RCMP realizes that it's time to crack down on this.
Yeah, the only person I see talking about this in the media is Sam Cooper.
That's it.
I mean, he's done great work covering this, but I know Canada does have some newspapers and some I guess the equivalent of NPR and the state-run media. So, you think that there would be some concern about this?
You would think, right? And see, what I was going to say is, luckily for us, Sam has screamed loud enough and long enough that people are starting to pay attention to him, because, see, Canada has this problem. We have this complex. We're second best to the United States in every way possible, right? So what Canadians often do is they look to the United States to validate things that they think are happening here, which is fucking insane, because it's like the US doesn't care about Canada. Only ever comes up in conversation in the US if there's something we have that you need. Otherwise, nobody cares that we're even here. And what happened with Sam was that Sam's reporting was starting to be referenced by people in the Pentagon and people in larger media networks and things like that in the US, which drew a lot of attention to what he had to say. And now, I mean, dude, it's kind of on Sam's shoulders to save the country, which is insane, which is like nuts. but he's out there doing it. And as a friend of his and somebody who knows him very well, like, I can tell you, brother, the stuff that he deals with, just the things that he deals with day in and day out, like just lawsuits that are just empty lawsuits, that are thrown at him, intended to drain his bank account, right? Like, what people don't understand is, like, lawfare, anybody can sue you for any reason. And if you don't have the money to defend yourself, you're fucked. And that's kind of what's happened with Sam, is like, he's just harassed constantly, nonstop, because he's pointing to something that we can all see and then just explaining what's happening. And, I think that's the danger that the United States now finds itself in as well, because this Chinese monster, and I call it that not because Chinese people are monsters, but the CCP monster.
I would say there's a cult that rules over the Chinese people that is separate from the Chinese people. And that's what we're talking about. The monster is the cult and the leadership the cult-like dictatorship that is ruling over the Chinese people. Because, like, it's the same people are in Taiwan, but they just have democracy and capitalism and only communist infiltration to a certain extent. So yeah, I think it's important to clarify that, but it's one of those things where you can just be careful about how you talk about it so that people can't take you out of context. But I think it's totally fair to call them monsters. I mean, we're talking about a regime that profits from organ harvesting from minorities. They're like, it's basically Chinese Nazism is what it is. They're running, forced detention camps, forced medical testing of Uyghur minorities so that they can harvest their organs and sell them on demand to, rich people who come to their hospitals. Like, if that doesn't deserve international condemnation in the title monster, I don't know what does.
Yes. That's why I'm talking to you, Steve. You're way better at articulating these things. But this thing has slipped into every facet of our society, and it has, because we are used to seeing the face of the monster and recognizing it immediately, and this one we can't. And like you mentioned earlier, what you just said with Chinese Nazism, I mean, this is a continuation of a regime that murdered 70 million people, right? Like, I mean, I would argue that the Chinese Communist Party has done more damage to their own people and to the world than Nazism ever could have dreamed of.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this is how big and dangerous this thing is. And it's not a matter of, like, you're walking down the street and some CCP member grabs your purse and shoots your brother. And no, this is like, they buy the business you work for. They buy your home. They enter your political sphere. They control your politics. They surround you completely and suffocate you. And that's how this works. And, just kind of going back to something that we talked about earlier on the immigration level, Chairman Mao believed that the export of the Chinese people was his greatest weapon. You can go back and read his writings about this. He wrote about this, I mean, like, in depth on a number of occasions, how he could export the Chinese around the world. And that was the Chinese Communist Party's greatest weapon, was their numbers and their population, but not in a kinetic war sense, in a sense of entering your society and taking it over. And I know that sounds crude to people listening who don't completely understand the issue, but take it from me, who's lived it, and Steve, who's reporting on this now, this is absolutely what's happening. And what's difficult is, how do we stop it? Because you can't bar Chinese people from entering politics or owning a business. But it's like every stone you turn over, you find the CCP, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing we know certainly doesn't work is hiding from it and not confronting the problem. Like, we know that the way that you take a first step towards understanding the problem and towards confronting the problem is to have accurate reporting and law enforcement telling the truth. Your federal government telling the truth about the scope and scale of the problem. Just burying your head in the sand and hoping stocks go up and you're going to have a comfortable materialistic existence. Like, that's not gonna cut it. But it's true to your point about dealing with the problem, because you're not just fighting like an ethnicity or a nationality. You're fighting just a regime. It's a cult again, and it just so happens that the people who benefit from it and the people who are agents of it all come from one country. It's the Chinese communism is what you're up against, and they'll use criminal groups, they'll use mass migration, they'll think in a very, very long-term sense about planting U.S. citizens in, whether it's about birthing hotels or through exploiting American immigration law or Canadian immigration law. We have now, Chinese, or I guess Mexican citizens who would be Mexican nationals who are Chinese in Mexico rather than Chinese Mexican, if you get what I'm saying, because that's how long, they've been thinking about exactly that strategy that Mao wrote about at length, using the export of their surplus male population as a weapon of war and a weapon of economic control. I mean, that's exactly what you're seeing. In terms of how you fight back against it, I think it's going to be system against system. I have to imagine communism has failed everywhere it's been tried. And that will be the same of Chinese communism. They have some benefits because they've embraced and kind of tried to lean on capitalism. And they have this kind of techno panopticon where the internet and technology and apps have allowed them to create a very, very comprehensive technological system of control. So they have that as their advantage. But I think that the biggest thing they have going for them is almost like an ally in American business and in, I guess, Western business, not paying attention to them as a geopolitical nemesis, but rather as a place where like our trinkets can be made. So we've offshored everything. We've invested in China. We've had like this entire economic focus. And this is true of Maine, but broadly speaking, it's true of the West. We've had this entire economic focus around like, well, how can I get rich based off China? Like, I know a couple of guys who got rich by, moving their supply chains to China and they get cheaper product there. Like, how can I get rich off of that? Or what stocks can I invest in that are going to get me rich off of China? So rather than seeing it as a nemesis, we've seen it as like an opportunity. And in so doing, we've enabled the rise of China to the point now where I guess we're in like the Thucydides trap of saying, oh, is there going to be a world war now? Well, I don't think so, because the Chinese Communist Party is like already winning. They're already very, very happy with the status quo. So why would they want hot war? Because they're already like deep behind American lines with their criminal, I guess, extensions. And we're just beginning to have like guys like me and Sam point at it and be like, hey, this doesn't seem right. Like, hey, can we come to just do something about this? For in my case, it's like 2 years of jumping up and down in front of these illegal drug cartels before you actually get significant attention on them, and even longer for Sam to be saying like, hey guys, I think this is a problem. Finally we're starting to see some breakthroughs, but this needs to be coming from mainstream media outlets. This needs to be coming from like, the Wall Street Journal sent a reporter here to do an investigation, and I said, okay, I'll take you to a bunch of like illegal cannabis houses. Oh, our security team didn't clear that. So this woman literally like landed in Bangor, went to a grow supply shop, and then got back on a plane and left. Like there's zero curiosity and investigative work, just like very, very lazy base level reporting from the mainstream media. But you're going to need like a combination of, noticing and investigative reporting and government that takes it seriously. I would say for Canadian viewers, listeners, pay attention to who joins and speaks up for Sam. Pay attention who speaks up for the brave new normal. Like, pay attention who's going to be aligning themselves with the people who are your sheepdogs. Because the people who don't make eye contact with Sam anymore and won't return his phone calls anymore, those are the ones that might have something to hide. Those are the ones who might be benefiting from what the Chinese are doing.
Yeah, and as Sam titled his book, a lot of it is also willful blindness, right? It's I mean, I've been to Maine before. I've had experience, talking to people there, and they very much, Maine is very close in proximity to Eastern Canada, right? So there's a lot of this similar sort of
very culturally the same. Yeah.
Very culturally similar, and they're great people. But I think what happens a lot of times is that you spend your life living in a world where everything is easily explained, and we're the good guys, the other guys are the bad guys, and we fight the bad guys over there. There's these narratives that we always followed. And it wasn't until, 10 or 20 years ago with the advent of the internet and the proliferation of information from people like yourself and Sam Cooper and others, where we've kind of learned that this was all a lie. It was all a myth the entire time. And now we're in a position where we have to face it. But I think the main challenge for a lot of people is finding the courage to actually face it. And I know here in Canada, there's just not a lot of people who have that type of courage. It's, they want to maintain the illusion for as long as they can, because it's hard to accept and admit to yourself that none of this was ever real, and that we were all just, drifting on a wind while some very dangerous things were happening beneath us. And, I think that's why this reporter from Wall Street Journal, which, I guarantee you, like, if they do write a piece on it, it'll be, I went to Maine and found nothing. Steve Robinson is a conservative whack job. That'll be the gist of the story. And it's, it's because there's a lot of what exists now in terms of legacy media exists only to maintain the status quo. And people get really, really afraid when that status quo is challenged, especially here in Canada. And that's the thing is, we're the disturbers, we're the disruptors. We're here to tell everybody what's actually happening in the world. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people, they would rather live the lie, knowing it's a lie, than to step forward and face what we're actually dealing with. And this thing with China, I mean, like you said, China doesn't want a kinetic war with the United States. They would lose instantly. It doesn't matter if they have the numbers in the population. China has never been a country that was successful in with hot war or even defending itself against invaders. But they won with TikTok. They won with, money laundering. I mean, look at TD Bank, a Canadian bank, was hit with the largest fine in the history of the world by the United States, $3.1 billion for laundering money for Chinese organized crime networks and Mexican cartels, right? But did these organized crime groups have to pay anything? No, they won. Walk down the street in any neighborhood in America and count the number of bodies that are strung out on fentanyl, folded in half on that street corner. They fucking won. And now we have to figure out how to fix this.
Yeah. And I would say, if you look at there's kind of, the base camp in Maine where this marijuana is being produced. Maybe it's moved to Massachusetts, New York, manufactured, refined, but it's finding its way through these networks into all of markets throughout the United States. And just to say some of that's in the form of a vape pen. Now, how easy would it be for them to take the cartridge of, the box of vape cartridges that's got weaponized swine flu or norovirus or something in it, and swap those out? They've already got the networks. And in many cases, American participants are buying it, paying for it, profiting from it. So it's a self-sustaining network based on the profits that everyone's making along the way from cheap and easy drugs. Now that's like a multimodal network. It can be switched to do various things. So what happens if it's just switched over to become a biological weapon, or a network for distributing a biological weapon throughout the United States? So yes, they may be happy distributing poisonous pesticide-laced weed throughout the United States, because that's in a way it's its own like opium war style chemical warfare, deadening the population. Regardless of how you feel about marijuana use, like a population that's smoking marijuana every day, all day, is going to be less efficient, less effective, less energetic than a population that's not smoking marijuana at all. And if they wanted to switch, though, and turn that into a more deadly, very intentional kind of attack, they'd be able to do it. And it would take us a very long time to understand what happened and who did it.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, it doesn't even have to go as far as a vape. Think about websites like Temu or Shein, right? Like you're buying clothing from these people. This is stuff that goes on your skin. How difficult would it be to, dye the fabric with a neurotoxin or a biotoxic chemical? It's not that difficult at all.
They're showing you how easy it is, because we've helped identify some of these neurotoxins in Maine that are showing up at sites in California in the Siskiyou National Forest. These are Chinese-made poisons that have no registered use in North America, which means that they don't test for them at cannabis labs. And the only way they identified what those poisons were in California was by bringing in the Weapons of Mass Destruction unit from the National Guard. So these are neurotoxins. If you strapped all of these chemicals onto a bomb or something, you would understand it as a chemical nerve agent and a biological weapon or a chemical weapon. But there's I guess you can stretch logic to understand that there's an agricultural application for them. Because if you dump like 12 or 15 of these different poisons into a barrel or a soda can and put a wick in it and let it smolder, the smoke fills the hoop house and coats all of the marijuana, everything in there, with fungicide and pesticide. So it preserves your product. You don't suffer profit loss because you're not getting like bugs, mildew, whatever, undermining the value of your product. But also all of your workers are getting contaminated with this. The house, if you're doing this in a residential house somewhere in Oregon or Washington State or Maine, the house is now going to be contaminated with all of these pesticides and fungicides. And then your end product, when say you've got 10,000 pounds of trim from all these different hoop houses and you do the gas extraction to suck the THC and CBD oil out of the trim, you're also going to be concentrating anything that's oil or gas soluble out of that product. So they found vape pens that test positive for like 18 or 19 different fungicides and pesticides. And that's just in California. But we know that their networks are linked because they've information that we've published at the Maine Wire shows that they've obtained a postal warrant for a location in California that was shipping products to hoop houses, that was shipping products to grow houses in Massachusetts, and was shipping products to a grow house in Maine, right outside of our state capital. And we actually went to that house and knocked on the door to try to talk with whoever was receiving those shipments. And 5 days later, that house went up for sale. And I mean, I'm sure that wasn't a coincidence. But then we did a story about it. And later, maybe 2 weeks later, that house is, again, it's up for sale. This grandmother walked through with her kids to do a showing of the house, and they all got sick. They all got like burning nose, burning eyes, coughing, respiratory symptoms. And they Googled the house and reached out to me because they wanted to know what they should do. I don't know what you should do. You just walk through a house contaminated with Chinese neurotoxins. I don't know, like call Beijing, but that's the problem is no one knows what to do, because these are unregistered, unstudied toxins. Like we don't know what any single one of them does individually used as indicated. But when you mix it with one chemical and then burn it, we don't know. If you mix it with those two other chemicals, we don't know. If you mix it with all different 12 in that combination and burn it and then let it sit in the house, well, we don't know about that either. So there's so many unknowns that we've introduced into the equation, both in the products that people are ingesting or smoking or vaping, but then also the fourth-hand exposure that people will get if they go into one of these houses. They've already demonstrated their ability to bring neurotoxins into the United States with us completely unaware. They're bringing in barrels of neurotoxins. And we just kind of haven't suffered from it extremely because they're using them at hoop houses and grow houses to protect their marijuana profits. But like, again, if they're bringing in actual neurotoxins, they could bring in anything. And they could use those same neurotoxins for any purpose they wanted to. Say they decide eventually they want to just dump it in the water supply rather than on their marijuana plants. What's stopping them?
Yes. I know we're running out of time here. I've kept you for a while, but that is the issue. The issue is what we were just talking about and what you just outlined here. We always think of war as guns and bombs and tanks and explosions, but how hard would it be for them to dump a barrel of neurotoxin into a river in Maine that runs into water sources for multiple cities and counties and then eventually states, right? Like, people forget about the train derailment in Palestine. I think that's in Palestine is in
East Palestine, Ohio.
Right? Yeah, East Palestine. East Palestine is a town in Ohio. There was a train that derailed and toxic chemicals went into the air everywhere. And the entire town is contaminated. There's still people there, right? Now imagine those double, triple that amount poured into a water source for multiple counties, multiple cities, and like I said, eventually leaking into the soil, into the well water of other counties and other states. Like, people, we have to understand, like, we can only look away from this stuff for so long. Eventually something's going to happen. And if we run into a scenario where the United States and China find themselves at odds, which seems like increasingly possible as time goes on, I mean, we are so vulnerable in so many ways. They could shut our lights out overnight without firing a single shot.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, people are very vulnerable, and it starts to, you feel like it starts to seem like Red Dawn talk. But the more you talk with people who are in law enforcement or former intelligence community or other reporters or people in the media who have followed this issue and studied this issue, it's not crazy. It's not like science fiction talk. You would have this is very basic stuff that was contemplated in the 90s when unrestricted warfare was written in the first place. This is stuff that's been contemplated, since the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. Are these clever, subtle ways to attack your enemies? And it's really all motivated by Communist Party ideology and this kind of like pagan materialism to acquire more property, which is it's one of the strangest, I guess, contradictions of Chinese communism, is that it's so driven by material wealth. Despite being like a communistic ideology, it's really driven by the status that comes with materialistic wealth and acquiring more and more and more. But they are driven to protect themselves and to acquire more. And I think as things financially and politically back in mainland China become more tenuous, they're going to have to become more aggressive in terms of their relationships with other nation states. Like maybe that means making a move on Taiwan. Could be just as basic as needing a distraction to keep people occupied, or needing a war machine to stimulate their economy, or whatever it is. I think that you won't see them just kind of like decide, yeah, okay, this didn't work, so we're just going to have elections and do democracy instead. Like it's going to, like when the Chinese Communist Party implodes or explodes, it's going to be a crisis for the entire world. But it's not going to just go quietly, transition into a democracy. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And so, Steve, final question before we go. Now, you've outlined, I mean, if I wasn't from where I'm from, I would think your story of what's happening in Maine to be incredulous. But I experienced the exact same thing you're experiencing, and the people that you love and your friends and people, like you said, that are, only in Maine because they can't get out at this point. So what are local and state law enforcement doing to crack down on this? Are they doing anything whatsoever? And is your investigative journalism on this informing them in any way?
So since we've been doing this for quite a while, it's kind of gone through a couple of stages. I think that initially, when we started reporting on this, we raised the public outcry, and there was people were looking at their county sheriffs and their law enforcement like, hey, what are you doing? In Maine, we have local police departments that are kind of hired by the city or the town council, but we have county level sheriffs that are popularly elected. And then our state level law enforcement they're basically state workers, they're government workers. And there's only one political appointee at the top of that. So the county sheriffs who are popularly elected were the tip of the spear going after the Chinese marijuana grows. They're not beholden to the governor. They're not beholden to the politicians who, control large cities. And in most cases, some of these little towns don't even have police departments. So it really fell to the county sheriffs. So you saw there were like somewhere between 60, 65 search warrants executed, including, 80 to 90 properties, depending on how you look at it. And there was a very rapid, in 2024, beginning in 2024, there was a very rapid kind of boom, 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 just doing these search warrants. And they would just confiscate plants. Sometimes they would arrest somebody, most of the time not. The people they arrested generally were like, middle-aged or elderly indentured servants who didn't really know what they were doing there, didn't want to be there. They weren't arresting like kingpins who are driving around in Cadillacs. They were arresting really just the low-level workers. So they weren't even making a dent in these places. And we would notice that places that had been raided would spring up a week, a month later, and they'd be growing again. And we learned at the end of 2024 that the cannabis regulatory body in Maine is giving medicinal licenses to all of the formerly illegal growers. And so we learned this and then set about trying to prove it. And then we're doing, hours and hours of investigative reporting and research to try to connect the dots between the illegal growers and the new license holders. And then in January, John Hudak, the head of the Office of Cannabis Policy, just comes out and says, yeah, we know we've been giving licenses to people affiliated with organized crime. I was like, what? No one else, no other outlet in the state covers that or thinks that's newsworthy. But I'm like, okay, the head cannabis guy just admitted that he's giving licenses to organized crime, and nobody else thinks that's unusual or interesting or worthy of talking about. So now that they've got these licenses, of course they're not following, the 35 plant limit of the medicinal license, but it gives them enough of camouflage so that no law enforcement can touch them. So they're like outside the regulatory purview of the law enforcement purview of local police, of sheriffs. There's nothing they can do. Now they might as well be like growing, too many blueberries or harvesting too many lobsters. Now this is an agricultural, offense basically. And the weird thing is that the Office of Cannabis Policy, the entire time they were operating totally illegally, their answer to us or to lawmakers was always, well, we can't do anything about it because they're not licensed. We only have authority over the licensed people. And now that they're licensed, they're still not doing anything about it. So, right. If you want to look at, government officials who have, through either their negligence or their corruption, I don't know which one, have aided and abetted the rise of the Chinese mafia in Maine, I think John Hudak would be one of the first places that you would have to look. Because, when I asked him questions about this in person, he was very, very skittish, very skittish. And it could be just that he was baked off his ass, which he was. Like, he's a medicinal marijuana user. He's red-faced, red-eyed. That's how he's been every time I've ever seen him. No offense to medicinal marijuana users, but he also could just be kind of paralyzed by this like liberal political correctness. Because when you ask him about like, well, hey, what about these Chinese criminal organizations? Well, we're concerned about all illicit marijuana. Okay, yeah, but what about the Chinese guys who are all working together, all speaking the same language, and are running around in CCP connected T-shirts and contraband? Well, we're concerned about all illicit marijuana. Okay, but what about the one that's affiliated with the CCP? Well, we're concerned about all illicit marijuana. It's like their mantra coming from them, And he even said, by way of explanation, that the reason he licensed these organized crime outfits or these people affiliated with organized crime is because it would be racist not to do so. It was like, I didn't have a way. I didn't have any kind of way to stop them from getting licenses. And, this is kind of niche to Maine, but like if a legal marijuana business owner whose last name is like Fournier or Gillette or, Robinson, for example, if they post on Instagram, John Hudak is fat and ugly, 2 days later, they're going to get a surprise inspection. So they somehow find room to have the discretionary authority to go do surprise inspections on people who criticize John Hudak on Instagram. But when it's the people they know are affiliated with a human trafficking ring, they're like, our hands are tied. What do you want us to do? We don't want someone calling us racist. Are you kidding me? Yep. Or human trafficking and neurotoxin laced weed. I mean, we can take that, but an allegation that we're racist? No, we wouldn't survive that.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Man, it is wild just how close these stories are to each other. It's the racism thing is one thing, but it's also the money. And if you track the money, if you follow the money, I guarantee you that if you looked into who's donating to these people and where those donations are coming from, you would find a bunch of numbered companies. And if you had a way to track who those numbered companies belong to, you would find exactly who you're looking for and who is behind them, right? And that's it.
Well, we found the largest donors to Governor Mills' inaugural committee were large cannabis companies on the adult use side, not on the medicinal side, but on the adult use side. I'm sorry, my dog's barking.
It's okay. Let him rip. That's fine. We're good.
He barked during the Tucker podcast too.
I heard that too.
Tucker asked for it. Tucker asked me to play it. It's interesting because the adult use cannabis companies, they're subject to more stringent regulations and mandatory track and trace, mandatory testing, that kind of thing. But they do benefit in a way from what the cartel growers are doing in that by muddying up the water, they're creating this outcry for a regulatory crackdown, which essentially benefits the biggest cannabis companies. So it's like, in the same way Home Depot and Walmart, They're okay with
Yep.
climate change regulations. They're okay with increasing the minimum wage because they have the capital to absorb and deal with that problem, but they know that their mom and pop competitors don't. But so if you raise up the minimum wage and their mom and pop competitors go out of business, well, they're going to end up benefiting from it because yes, they're paying higher labor costs, but they're also getting a larger market share. So the large cannabis companies want to be, like the Bud Light or the Coors Light of the marijuana business. And so in a weird way, if they take if they take the Chinese communist view of it and it's long term and they're playing for 7 years from now rather than 1 or 2 years from now, they know that allowing the illegal grows to proliferate and muddy the waters and create outcry for this huge regulatory clampdown, it's going to benefit them. It's going to benefit them in the long run to allow these guys to do what they're doing. And it sounds wacky and conspiratorial, but if I wasn't like here seeing it firsthand and like talking with these people and having them, go from liking me and liking my reporting to, not picking up my phone calls and not wanting to talk with me and not being able to make eye contact with me in the State House, I wouldn't believe it myself. But it's the only explanation, the only explanation for why this has been why they're allowing this to happen and why it continues to happen is that people want it to. And there are powerful people who want it to continue happening. And they're not all Chinese members of the Chinese drug cartel. A lot of them are Americans. A lot of them are Mainers. A lot of them are elected officials. A lot of them in law enforcement. They want it to continue happening. And so it is continuing to happen. And the question is, why do they want it to continue happening?
Yeah, that's a big question too. And it's one that I really hope that you can, I think you have some ideas, obviously.
I got some suspicions. But again, like, I don't want to be a cannabis reporter and I don't want to be a China reporter. I'm just trying to keep my focus on my little piece of the backyard here in Maine.
Yeah.
I've there's plenty of people reporting on, Washington, D.C. and getting leaks from the CIA and the FBI. I just want to report on my home state. But it's increasingly, causing me to be an expert in Somalian elections and, the Chinese organ trade. But I guess that's what globalization brings us.
Just on a larger scale, the erosion of Western culture is 100% has to do with our drive toward globalism, right? You destroy Western culture, then you'll accept whatever cultures are available to you. And we often conflate the immigration issue with race, but it's not a race issue. It's a cultural issue.
Exactly.
And I'm writing an essay right now on this, but you look at Black America. Black America has been the American cultural engine for 100 years. And how much do Black Americans have in common with, say, Nigerians or Kenyans or Somalians? Nothing.
No, nothing.
Although they share the same ancestral roots, right? And that just goes to prove it's not a race. It's not a race thing. It's a culture thing, and that's where we are. And look, man, I'll tell you, I don't want to be the China guy either. Me and Sam work so closely together that he and I have kind of been pegged as China guys. But the thing is every time I look into anything, it always traces back to China.
Yeah.
Our DEI, our neoliberal cultural revolution that we experienced, it traces back to China and Maoist thought. And look, you can't tell me this isn't deliberate when you pipe in a type of brainwashing that serves as a bulletproof defense against any criticism of any of the things that we're talking about. Right. Yeah. Look, man, it's very easy to listen to the 90 minutes that you and I have been talking and go, they're just racist, Nazi, conservative, alt-right Trump supporters, rather than facing the reality of what we're actually dealing with. And that's by design, man. You can't tell me that's not by design. You can't tell me that we haven't been thrusted into this cultural revolution and now on the other side of it, specifically so that we don't criticize these things. You can't tell me that didn't happen on purpose.
Yeah. I think it's like there's a broad spectrum of, ill consequences that have come in America because of our inability to speak truthfully about things like the effect of Chinese communism and the self-censorship that goes on, and law enforcement in Maine, for example, saying well, we can't go enforce the laws equally in a colorblind way, or else people will think we're racist. Like that's really what they're doing. They're like, we're not going to enforce the laws against these one people who look this certain way. Otherwise, people will think we're racist. It's like, well, no, now you're being racist in order to avoid being racist. So who's actually racist in this situation? Like your people
Exactly.
are twisting their minds into pretzels just to try to accommodate these new rules of society that you see unfolding. And I don't know if it's something that was, intentionally injected as Maoist thought, or something that, came about because academics in America actually wanted it, benefited from it, thought it was like this novel idea. But I know for certain that the Chinese criminal organizations are exploiting that impulse to the nth degree. Like they know that if they all of a sudden just lose the ability to speak English, the sudden onset amnesia is a big thing in Maine. If a Chinese guy is being asked about what's going on inside his property, it just suddenly loses the ability to speak English. Or if he's talking with a cop, English just goes away. And as a result, they just get released. It doesn't matter what they do, because if the cops can't understand what they're saying, they just have no basis for holding them, I guess. But the exploitation of that liberal impulse to just want to be PC and want to, avoid offending anybody and not rock the boat and have this multiculturalism kumbaya, that's definitely a strategy that they're doing. They're very intentionally manipulating American emotions and American sentiment in order to ruthlessly spread their criminal networks through American society with no regard whatsoever for the people in America. Like these are people who will take their fellow countrymen, and if they're just like Falun Gong, just have like a different belief system, carve them up, involuntarily, and hand out their organs to the highest bidder. These are people who are importing their fellow countrymen from China through Mexico up to New England, and then locking them in pothouses as slaves. Like they're enslaving their own people and selling their organs. And you think that they care about Americans? You think that they're going to sell you like high quality cannabis if they can find a buck selling you poisonous cannabis? Like, no, this is pagan materialism that has zero care, affection, or regard for American society, American culture, American individuals, except insofar as we're tools, we're people who can be bribed to help them, expand their empire, the Middle Kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this reluctance to confront it comes from the same place where, Western liberals, metropolitan liberals, I should say, it comes from the same place where they view, Mexicans and Latin American immigrants as the people who clean your toilets, wash your clothes, pick your vegetables. How are you ever going to get lettuce without these people? It's like, you fucking racist. Yeah. And that's, it's upside down world.
Yeah.
It's white liberal racism on full display. Yeah. I saw a video today from some Democrat, where it's like all these, Latin American people holding vegetables in a dirty fucking field, and they're covered in dirt head to toe, and it's all in slow motion, meant to like draw empathy out of the viewer. And it's like, that's right. Democrats need their fucking slaves. Same with Canada. Yeah. The liberals need their slaves. We can't send the slaves home. We need our slaves. How else are we going to capitalize on all of our agricultural products? We need to pay people $1 a fucking hour and put them out in the fields for 16 hours a day. That's how we make money. We need our slaves. Keep them coming. And it drives me fucking crazy, because it's like, does nobody see this? Has nobody put any of this together yet? No, this is racism.
This very much
the definition of it.
They're like out making that argument. Like even when the glass house raid happened in California, and there's 350 Central American illegal immigrants, including minors, who are detained by ICE before they know that it's a marijuana farm. Gavin Newsom is out there saying like, these migrant workers are the backbone of our economy. It's like, really? Child slaves picking marijuana are the backbone of your economy? Well, then you need to change, not the federal government and not ICE and the immigration authorities. But just like a similar example on a smaller scale in Maine, as this entire Chinese criminal network is proliferating throughout Maine, the Democrats are having a heated political fight over the agricultural minimum wage. You know, it's the same. It's the same politicians who don't want to recognize that you have indentured slaves, indentured servants locked up in houses by a criminal group growing marijuana. They don't want to acknowledge it. Don't want to pay attention. Oh, that's just a right-wing story. You don't want to pay attention to it. But damn it, we're going to go to the mat for the agricultural minimum wage to make sure that that gets enforced. But the other thing I would say about the agricultural workers as exploited labor is that if the same people who like the politician you were just talking about saying like these are the people who, you know, what are we going to do without them to pick our vegetables? It's like, well, what are they going to do when their foot gets chopped off by a lawnmower? Like, are they going to get workers' comp? Are they going to get taken care of? Or is their employer just going to dump them in front of an emergency department? That's probably what's going to happen. So what you're doing is you're socializing the cost of allowing this business to use slave labor. And it's even like or migrant labor, I should say. It's even true of, you know, the people who just have like a migrant mowing their lawn or as a contractor in their business. It's like, okay, you might be paying less, but in terms, society is bearing the cost of that because we're having to take on the cost of the healthcare, whatever crime might spiral out from the act of illegal immigration itself. But, you know, God forbid this guy gets hurt. There's no safety net for him except for the emergency department and the government system. So he's not going to get workers' comp and he's not going to get taken care of. So it's really, you know, it's heartless, really. I mean, yes. I would think that, you know, the large scale agricultural businesses could be using robots at this point. You know, I've seen plenty of videos of very large, sophisticated robots picking radishes and carrots and tomatoes. I think that you know, with a little bit of money in R&D and infrastructure investment, we don't need to resort to the same methods that they were using 2,000 years ago to pick produce. And then if you had an economy that was built around high tech manufacturing, well, then maybe manufacturing jobs would be like actually, you know, rising in America. Maybe like a robotics engineer. Maybe that's something that you could still you know, maintain a household off of as an adult male. But, you know, if you take the easy way out and you rely on the illegal alien labor, you know, it's not going to last forever. You know, what can't last won't. And that's the situation that I feel like we're rapidly approaching, both in the United States and Canada. You know, and I know that there's the divisions have been stoked because of, you know, the tariff spats. And, you know, I think there's Canadians and Americans just enjoy fighting online with each other to a certain extent. But I think that the differences are exaggerated. And, you know, we're in the same boat. You know, we may be headed off the waterfall together, but we're in the same boat. So I would think that there needs to be a joint strategy to repel the Chinese Communist Party because, you know, it's not going to happen like just in America, but not in Canada. It's not going to happen just in Canada, but not in America, you know, for good or for better. I mean, if this thing gets turned around, it can only be through a joint strategy. You know, it's going to have to be, I think, a conservative leader in Canada is going to have to, you know, speak frankly about this problem and not have been compromised already.
The problem with the conservatives in Canada, like I always say this, like, you know, in Canada, liberals always, you know, get themselves twisted in knots over conservatives. And I always tell them, you guys haven't seen fucking conservatives. Our conservatives in Canada are liberals. These guys aren't even close to Republicans. Equating Pierre Poilievre to Donald Trump. I mean, Trump isn't even a conservative in my opinion, but equating, you know, Pierre Poilievre to, I don't know, Ted Cruz, you know what I mean? Like, they're not even in the same world. They don't even exist in the same realm, right? And like, and we'll close on this, but I think the only way to solve this problem, at least in Canada, is annexation. And I think that's coming one way or the other, because as this hybrid war with China heats up, the U.S. cannot have an enemy on its border. And that's really what this whole 51st state talk has been about. Trump is terrible at articulating these ideas and really laying them out there so that people can understand. He just says bombastic shit like 51st state. But the truth is that China is so embedded in Canadian society at all levels that the U.S. just can't have it. And look, let's face it, man, the U.S. is the world power, still is for now. So they're going to have to do something about it. And I really, as an observer and, you know, a student of history and somebody who understands what happens with smaller countries when a larger power has an enemy on their border, I just don't know if Canada is going to exist, at least in the way that it does now, in the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, we're really cutting it that close.
Yeah, I don't think that the United States can survive Canada becoming as pernicious a force as Mexico has become. I mean, Mexico is
Yeah.
barely even a country. It's a narco terror state in the land where the country of Mexico used to exist. It's just totally lawless, and it's the effect that it's been having on the United States has been mitigated by President Trump closing down the border, and illegal crossings have slowed. But all it's going to take is a little bit of political change, and that could shift immediately. And you're already seeing, I think, the closure of the southern border is placing greater pressure on the northern border because they want to get their drugs to market or the people to market or whatever. There's a market for crossing, and it's now just shifting to Canada. But I don't think, the border is so big and so unpopulated. I mean, just in Maine, the amount of areas where you can just like walk into. I mean, I've done it. Just walk into Canada, walk back into the United States, walk into Canada. I mean, there's so many areas like that. I don't think you could shut it down like you could with the Mexican border. I don't think you'd be able to do that. So yeah, it's
and the difference is here too is that the threat that Canada presents is not like Mexico in that look, I mean, these cartels aren't stupid. I mean, there are members of Mexican cartels who are very business minded, very professional, but they're not entering politics. They're not, taking over school boards and municipal governments and things. That's what's happening here in Canada. And look at what happened with Kathy Hochul in New York with Linda Sun, right? Now multiply that by thousands across the United States if this thing continues to proliferate, right? Yeah. So sooner or later, American intelligence agencies, American law enforcement, I mean, the DEA just busted, I think it was like 40 kilos of precursor heading down to Los Angeles from Vancouver with a plan to ship 40 more kilos per month. That's fentanyl precursor, right? Sam recently reported on that. And this is going to keep happening because Canada does not have its shit together, nor does it have any interest in it because the people who are running the show are beholden to the same people who are running illegal cannabis grow ops in Maine and other places throughout the United States, national parks, and so on and so forth. So if they're going to solve this problem with Canada, the tariffs are one thing. And honestly, listening to Canadians bitch and moan about these tariffs, it's like you do realize that we tariff absolutely everything coming into this country from the United States. Like we have had a lopsided trade relationship forever. This was going to happen sooner or later. It's just Trump has the balls to do it. That's it, right? But beyond that, the United States has a major problem with Canada. And they're going to have to solve it for your own national interests and your own national defense sooner or later. And that's where we're going. So I guess in closing, I look forward to being your American brother.
Well, I appreciate it. We'll take you on as maybe the American 51st through 55th states. We could use some, we want to balance out the Senate. We want to make sure we've got dedicated senators for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and we don't want just Justin Trudeau's coming down to the United States Senate.
That's what somebody. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying on a closing note. I mean, Fidel Castro's his dad, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, look, that's one conspiracy theory I just want to be true. I believe.
Yeah, I mean, what's strange for us is that we had Justin Trudeau, the baby commie. A friend of mine once said you could put a pebble in his ear and hear it rattle in his skull. There's nothing between the fucking guy's ears. I mean, he was literally a puppet for agenda, but now we have the architect of that agenda, Mark Carney, as our prime minister, which we just jumped out of the frying pan into the fire. And, somebody said to me recently, we were talking about annexation. They're like, I don't really know if America wants 40 million liberals.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Do we really need 40 million liberals? And also, I mean, your foreign-born population is at 10 million. So do we need another 10 million illegal aliens just by way of Canada?
Yeah. Well, we didn't even get to this, and you and I can have a separate discussion on this if you're ever available for
Absolutely.
it. But the immigration angle is a big one. Like here in Canada, we've let in 5 million people on student visas. And temporary work visas, in April 2024, 50,000 of them just disappeared, right? Like we've let in, so our population at the time was roughly 35 million. We let in, I think, something like 5% of our current population over the last few years. Like we're at this point where it's like, it's insane. It's like it's
Crazy.
it's beyond unsustainable. It's like, what are we doing? What happened? Like, I'm in Alberta, which is the most conservative province in the country, and I'm here for a reason. And they have purposefully funneled tens of thousands of immigrants into our communities because, of course, the Liberal Party, they have this liberals. They always have this idea that by funneling immigrants into your communities, you're going to flip it liberal, even though a lot of immigrants are themselves, conservative culturally.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So it tends to go the other way a lot of the time once they've been here a while. But, obviously the idea is you bring in a bunch of people who are dependent upon the state, and they will vote for the government that is going to keep feeding them. Right.
Yeah.
And, here in Canada, it's just, honestly, like in Alberta, we're talking about having a referendum to vote yes or no on joining the United States. And once we have that referendum, I am absolutely positive everybody's voting yes, because we're fucking done. We're ready to go. Especially because
that
oil
would probably
and
be
gas.
a superior solution to my mind, is to just absorb the resource-rich and conservative provinces of Canada, and we can just leave British Columbia, the Maritime. I mean, I've got a special fondness for the Maritime provinces. I know they tend to vote Liberal, but they're conservative, hardy, Atlantic coast people, just like we here.
They'll wake up.
Yeah, hopefully they can wake up. I mean, But we'll take Alberta though, for sure.
Well, we're ready to go, man. Everybody here is just like waiting for it. We're just waiting to vote. So, Steve, man, thank you so much for your time today. This was super awesome. Like I punched the roof of my car when I was listening to your conversation with Tucker, because I'm so glad that some investigative journalist in the US picked up on this, because I think you bringing this to the public, to public view is absolutely necessary. And once Americans are aware of what's happening in your country, it'll light the wick to solve, or at least create awareness around what has been happening in Canada. So that's my long-winded way of saying thanks for talking to me, man.
Thank you.
Steve, before you go, really quickly, where can everybody watch the High Crimes? We didn't even talk about the documentary, but where can everybody watch the High Crimes documentary, and where can people follow you?
Yeah, so everything is on tuckercarlson.com. If you go to tuckercarlson.com, the documentary and our episode are right on his homepage, or if you just Google Tucker Carlson High Crimes. You have to be a member of Tucker Carlson Network in order to watch it. But I think it's like $5 or $6 a month, something like that. It's cheaper than going out to the movies to watch some slop from Hollywood. And you'll see me running around the wilderness of Maine, chasing down Chinese drug dealers and cannabis traffickers. And if you just go to his YouTube channel, Tucker Carlson, Steve Robinson, you can watch the podcast episode that we did with each other. And we do. I have a Substack, but most of our journalism comes through themainwire.com. And we talked earlier about the story of the carbon monoxide poisoning, and we just published a story today about kind of what we learned from the police documents of that case, which really points to New York as having been compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, they're printing fake identity documents for Chinese drug cartel members. And we just see it in vivid relief here. Something needs to be done before we can even deal with Canada. We've got to start dealing with New York. I think the other states should be suing New York over their identity document practices. But anyways, it's a long way of saying everything's at tuckercarlson.com and themainwire.com.
And where can they follow you on X, Steve?
I'm on X at BigSteve207.
Awesome. Well, once again, Steve, thank you, man. I look forward to circling back with another conversation. But, dude, for now, you've given me more than enough to think about. So I really appreciate your time, brother, and thank you.
Thank you.